The law is a blunt instrument in the hands of a desperate woman, but it is a scalpel in the hands of a man who knows how to wait. My wife thought she could erase me from our life in San Francisco with a single signature on a temporary protective order. She called it the silver bullet divorce strategy. It is a common move in the high-stakes playgrounds of the Bay Area, where the winner takes the house, the kids, and the reputation, while the loser is left on the sidewalk with nothing but a restraining order and a shattered soul. She believed that by claiming I was a threat, she could fast-track her exit into the arms of the man she had been seeing behind my back since the middle of last summer. She was wrong. The court saw through the performance, and the order was dismissed for lack of evidence. Now we are locked in a cold war of rotating shifts in our Victorian home in Pacific Heights. We swap places every few days to maintain a semblance of stability for our two young children, while the air between us remains thick with the scent of a coming storm. My wife, Claire, still has no idea that I know everything. She thinks I am a broken man, trying to find his footing after a false accusation. She does not realize that I have spent the last 6 months building a digital and physical map of her betrayal. I have the receipts, the location data, and the eyewitness reports that will turn her silver bullet into a handful of sand when we finally walk into that courtroom for discovery. The rotation is a psychological torture chamber. I walk into the house on my designated days and smell the lingering perfume of a woman who is already living another life. I see the subtle changes she makes to the decor, as if she is slowly exorcising my ghost before I'm even gone. But I am not a ghost. I am the architect of her coming reality. While she was out spending long nights at a house in the Richmond district, I was documenting every minute of her absence. I have proof that she left our 3- and 5-year-old children with me for entire weekends without a single check-in call while she was busy with her affair partner. She told me she was at corporate retreats or staying late at the office to finish a merger. In reality, she was miles away in the arms of a man named Bennett Vance. I have the screenshots of her car parked at his house and his sister's house. I have the timestamps that show she was nowhere near her office when our daughter was crying in the school nurse's office with a fever. The school called her multiple times, and she ignored every single one of them. My private investigator captured photos of her laughing over a glass of wine at an outdoor cafe in Sausalito, while the school secretary was leaving desperate voicemails on her phone. I was the one who finally took the call and rushed from my own meeting to pick up our sick child. Claire does not know that those call logs and those photos are now part of a legal file that is growing larger by the day. The man she chose is a shadow of what she thinks he is. Bennett Vance finalized his own divorce at the end of September, and Claire took that as her signal to blow up our family on October 6th. She thinks she has found a soulmate who understands her. She has no clue that I have dug into his past and found the skeletons he kept hidden during their secret trysts. Bennett has not had one previous marriage, as he told her. He has had 2. More importantly, the records from his first marriage include 4 separate counts of domestic violence history. He is a predator who hides behind a curated image of success, and Claire is walking straight into a trap of her own making. She is so blinded by the rush of a new relationship that she has neglected the very children she claimed I was a threat to. During the brief period when her temporary protective order was active and I was forced to live in a rental apartment, she took a 3-day trip out of state to be with him. She did not leave the children with her parents or a trusted friend. She left them with a woman they had never met before, a complete stranger she found through a last-minute service. My children spent 72 hours with a person who did not know their favorite foods or their bedtime routines, while their mother was chasing a high in a different time zone. That single decision will likely cost her the primary custody she is so desperate to keep.
My attorney, Regina, is what people in this city call a bulldog, but I prefer to think of her as a grand master of legal chess. She is a woman who understands that in high-asset divorces, the one who loses their cool loses the game. Regina has already issued the notices. Discovery begins on January 9th, and Claire's world is about to narrow down to a very small point. We have scheduled her deposition for January 22nd. She will be forced to sit in a room and answer questions under oath, while the evidence of her neglect and her lies is laid out on the table. Regina has also subpoenaed the records from the children's school. We are going to show the court exactly how many times Claire failed to show up. We will present the attendance records, the homework center logs, and the sick call reports that paint a picture of a mother who was too busy with an affair to care for her own offspring. Claire still thinks she is in control. She has gone through 2 different attorneys already, and her current counsel is from an out-of-town firm that does not know the local judges or the way Regina operates. They are walking into a buzzsaw, and they do not even hear the blade spinning. Lately, Claire's tone in her messages has shifted. The cold arrogance that defined her behavior in October and November has been replaced by a sudden warmth. She is being kinder in her texts, and she is suddenly very interested in settling the case. She tells me that we should get all this behind us for the sake of the kids. She wants to avoid the messiness of a trial. It is a transparent move. She likely senses that the walls are closing in, or perhaps Bennett Vance is starting to show his true colors now that the fantasy of the affair has met the reality of a looming legal battle. She wants to walk away with half of everything and a clean slate. She does not know that I am not interested in a simple settlement that ignores her actions. I am aiming for 60% custody of our children, and I have the financial means to buy out her equity in our Pacific Heights home. I want to keep the house where my children were born, and I want to ensure that they are never again left with strangers while their mother pursues a man with a violent past. The house is worth millions, but to me it is the fortress I must defend. My financial standing is secure, and my resolve is absolute. The evidence I hold is not just about the affair. Adultery is one thing, but child neglect and legal weaponization are another. The court does not look kindly on parents who use protective orders as a tactical advantage in a divorce, only to have those orders dismissed for lack of merit. It shows a willingness to subvert the law and harm the other parent for personal gain. When you add in the fact that she was absent while our children were sick and that she left them with a stranger to leave the state, the narrative of the fit mother begins to crumble. Claire is still living in a dream world where she gets the boyfriend and the house and the kids, while I am relegated to a weekend visitor who pays her way. She has no idea that the deposition in January will be the moment her dream turns into a nightmare. She will have to explain the gap between her claims and the PI reports. She will have to explain why her work attendance was minimal while she was supposedly working late. She will have to explain why she is bringing a man with a history of violence into the orbit of our children. I spend my nights in the house during my rotation, looking at the photos of us on the mantel. I look at the woman I thought I knew, and I realize she never existed. The woman who stands in my kitchen now is a stranger who would lie to a judge to keep me from my son and daughter. She is a woman who would leave her sick children to drink wine with a criminal. There is no room for mercy in a war like this. I am not seeking to destroy her for the sake of revenge alone, but I am seeking to protect my family from the chaos she has invited in. Every piece of evidence I have gathered is a brick in the wall I am building around my children. The fog of San Francisco often hides the truth, but the sun always rises eventually. By the end of January, the light will be blinding. She wants to settle now because she thinks she can still salvage her reputation. She does not realize that the reputation she cares so much about is already forfeit. The subpoenas are out, and the truth is no longer her secret to keep. I will watch her face during the deposition when Regina reveals the depth of our knowledge. I will watch the realization dawn on her that she has lost everything before she even knew the game had truly begun. The fog in San Francisco has a way of swallowing the truth, but it cannot hide the digital trail left by a woman who thinks she is smarter than the man she is trying to destroy. Claire has spent the last few months operating under the assumption that I am a passive observer in my own life. She believes that because the court dismissed her temporary protective order, she can simply pivot back to a cold coexistence while she prepares her next move. She does not realize that every day she spends in our Pacific Heights home during her rotation is a day where I am gathering more rope for her to hang her own reputation. The air in the house is sterile and heavy, with the scent of a dying marriage. When I walk through the front door for my scheduled time, I see the subtle shifts in the environment that tell me she is already checked out. She leaves the mail on the counter and the children's toys scattered in the hallway as if she is a guest in a hotel rather than a mother in her home. But behind my calm exterior, I am a man possessed by the clarity of the evidence I hold. January 9th is the beginning of the end for her. That is the date discovery starts and the legal gears begin to grind the bones of her lies into dust. My attorney, Regina, has already laid the groundwork for a total offensive. Regina is a woman who has built her career on dissecting the false narratives of people like Claire. She knows that the silver bullet divorce strategy only works if the target panics and gives up. Since I did not panic and I did not give up, Claire is now left with a dismissed order and a mounting pile of evidence that proves she is the one who has failed our family. We are not just looking for proof of an affair. Adultery is a common story in this city of high pressure and higher egos. What we are documenting is a pattern of calculated neglect and the weaponization of the legal system to facilitate a secret life. The private investigator reports are chilling in their precision. I have records from July and August, long before she filed for divorce, showing that she frequently left our 3- and 5-year-old children with me for entire weekends without a single check-in. She would tell me she had to be at a conference or a late-night closing at the firm, but the GPS data and the surveillance photos show she was in the Richmond district at the home of Bennett Vance. I have screenshots of her location pins that match his address and the address of his sister. While I was at home changing diapers and reading bedtime stories, she was blocks away, drinking expensive wine and laughing about a future that did not include me. The evidence shows that her absence was not just emotional, but physical and dangerous. One of the most damning pieces of evidence involves her failure to respond to the children's needs at school. Regina has subpoenaed the records from both the preschool and the elementary school. We have found multiple instances where the school nurse called Claire because our daughter had a fever or our son had an accident. On 3 separate occasions in the fall, Claire ignored the calls and the emails for hours. The private investigator has photos of her at a cafe in Sausalito with Bennett during those exact hours. She chose a lunch date over her sick children. She chose the attention of a man she barely knew over the responsibilities she swore to uphold. When the court sees the call logs side by side with the surveillance photos, the image of the devoted mother Claire tries to project will evaporate. Then there's the incident during the temporary protective order. When she used the law to force me out of our home, she claimed she needed the space to protect the children from my supposed instability. However, the reality of what she did with that space is horrifying. For 3 days in October, she left the state to travel to Nevada with Bennett. Instead of leaving our children with family or a trusted nanny, she hired a woman from an online service whom the children had never met. My children were left for 72 hours in the care of a total stranger in their own home while their mother was in another state with her lover. This happened while I was sitting in a small rental apartment, forbidden by the court from even calling them. She used a protective order to keep a loving father away so she could abandon her children with a stranger for a getaway. Regina is going to use this to prove that Claire's filing was a bad faith tactic designed solely to provide her with the freedom to pursue her affair.
Bennett Vance is not the hero in this story either. Claire is so enamored with his status and his words that she has failed to do even a basic background check on the man she wants to bring into our children's lives. Bennett finalized his divorce in September, but that was only his most recent one. I have the records from his first marriage, which tell a much darker story. That marriage ended with 4 separate counts of domestic violence history. He is a man with a documented history of aggression, and Claire is trying to introduce him to our son and daughter as a new father figure. She has no idea that I have these records. She has no idea that the man she thinks is her savior is a liability that will likely cost her everything in the eyes of a family court judge. Lately, the tone of her communication has changed. The icy silence and the sharp demands have been replaced by a soft and conciliatory language. She has been kinder in her messages, and she has suddenly started suggesting that we should settle this for the kids' sake. She says we can split everything down the middle and move on with our lives without the need for a messy trial. It is a transparent attempt to hide from the consequences of her actions. She likely knows that discovery is going to reveal things she cannot explain away. She wants to lock me into a settlement before the subpoenas bring the truth to the surface. She thinks she can still charm me into giving her what she wants. She does not realize that the man she is talking to is no longer her husband, but a legal adversary who is focused on the singular goal of protecting his children. I am financially prepared to take this to the very end. I have the resources to buy out her equity in our Pacific Heights home, and I am not going to settle for 50-50 custody. Based on her history of neglect and the dangerous nature of her new partner, I am aiming for 60% custody. I want to be the one who makes the decisions about their education, their health, and their safety. I want the house to remain a sanctuary for them, free from the influence of a man like Bennett Vance and the instability of a mother who views them as an inconvenience to her romantic life. Claire thinks she is playing for half the assets, but I am playing for the future of our family. The deposition on January 22nd will be the moment of truth. Claire will sit in a conference room, and she will have to answer questions under oath about where she was on the days she told me she was working. She will have to explain why her work attendance was minimal while she was supposedly at her firm. She will have to look at the photos of herself with Bennett while her daughter was sitting in a school nurse office. She will have to justify leaving our children with a stranger while I was legally barred from the house. And most importantly, she will have to answer for the man she has chosen to bring into their orbit. Regina is a master of the slow reveal, and I will be there to watch every second of it. I will watch the moment Claire realizes that the silver bullet she fired at me has circled back and is now aimed directly at her own heart. The fog in this city may roll in every evening, but the light of the truth is stronger than any San Francisco weather. Claire has built her new life on a foundation of lies and neglect, and she is about to find out that the legal system is not as easily manipulated as she thought. She wants to settle because she is afraid, but I am not afraid. I am patient. I have documented every hour, every missed call, and every betrayal. I am not seeking revenge for the sake of hurting her, but I am seeking a resolution that ensures my children are never again left in the hands of a stranger or a violent man. The rotation continues for now, but the end is in sight. By the end of January, the house in Pacific Heights will belong to me and my children, and the woman who tried to erase me will be nothing more than a memory of a lesson learned the hard way.
The morning of January 22nd arrived with the kind of heavy gray mist that makes the Golden Gate Bridge look like a phantom suspended in the air. I stood in the kitchen of our Pacific Heights home watching the clock on the wall tick toward the hour when the truth would finally become a matter of public record. Claire was upstairs, preparing for the day with the same meticulous care she used to use for our anniversary dinners. She still believed that she could charm her way through a deposition. She had spent the last 2 weeks being remarkably pleasant and offering small concessions as if she were trying to bribe me with kindness to stop the wheels of justice from turning. She did not know that the discovery period, which began on January 9th, had already yielded more than enough evidence to dismantle her life piece by piece. My lawyer, Regina, had spent the last 13 days reviewing the financial records and the school logs and the reports from the private investigator. The trap was set, and the door was about to close. We met in a glass-walled conference room in a high-rise overlooking the bay. The setting was clinical and cold, designed to remind everyone in the room that the law does not care about feelings or excuses. Claire arrived with her attorney, a man from out of town who looked out of his element in the sharp and fast-paced legal environment of San Francisco. He seemed to believe this would be a standard negotiation, followed by brief questioning. He did not realize that Regina was carrying a briefcase filled with every mistake his client had made since the middle of last summer. I sat at the end of the table, maintaining a neutral expression, while Claire sat across from me with a look of practiced concern. She reached out to touch my hand before the proceedings began and whispered that we could still end this before it got ugly. I moved my hand away and looked her directly in the eye and said nothing. The time for whispering was over. The court reporter began the transcription, and Regina started the questioning with a deceptive softness. She asked Claire about her routine and her commitment to the children. Claire spoke at length about her role as the primary caregiver and how much she sacrificed for the well-being of our son and daughter. She played the part of the grieving mother who had been forced to file a protective order for the safety of her family. Regina let her speak for 20 minutes, allowing her to weave a complex web of lies that painted me as an unstable threat and herself as a saint. Then Regina reached into her folder and pulled out the first of the subpoenas from the children's school. The shift in the room was instantaneous. Regina began to read from the attendance logs and the nurse office records. She asked Claire to explain why she was listed as the first contact for emergencies, but had failed to answer her phone on 6 separate occasions when our daughter was ill. Claire tried to claim that she was in high-stakes meetings where she could not use her phone. Regina immediately produced the surveillance photos from the private investigator, showing Claire sitting in an outdoor cafe in Sausalito with Bennett Vance during those exact hours. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was undeniable. The photos were time-stamped and the location data from her own car matched the cafe address. The image of the devoted mother began to crack. Regina did not stop there. She moved on to the 3-day period when the temporary protective order was active. She asked Claire under oath who had cared for the children while I was barred from the house. Claire hesitated and said she had hired a professional nanny. Regina then asked for the name of the agency and the name of the individual. When Claire could not provide them, Regina produced the records from a last-minute online childcare service. She pointed out that the woman hired was a stranger with no prior relationship with the children. Then she showed the airline tickets and hotel receipts that proved Claire had left the state to be in Nevada with Bennett Vance during those 72 hours. Regina asked Claire how she could claim I was a danger to the children while she felt comfortable leaving them with a total stranger so she could pursue a romantic getaway. Claire's lawyer looked at the documents, and I saw the color drain from his face. He realized in that moment that his client had lied to him as much as she had lied to the court.
The final blow came when Regina turned the focus on Bennett Vance. Claire tried to defend him, saying he was a stable man who had just finished a difficult divorce. Regina then laid out the records from his first marriage and the 4 counts of domestic violence history. She asked Claire if she felt it was in the best interest of the children to introduce them to a man with a documented history of violence. Claire looked like she wanted to scream, but she was trapped by the oath she had taken. Every lie she had told to get that initial protective order was now being used as evidence of her own bad faith. Regina pointed out that the court had already dismissed the order for lack of merit, and now we had proof that the order was nothing more than a tactical weapon used to facilitate an affair and child neglect. By the time the deposition ended, 5 hours later, Claire was a shell of the woman who had walked into the room. Her lawyer asked for a private session in the hallway, and when they returned, his entire demeanor had changed. He no longer looked at me with disdain. He looked at Regina with the respect one shows to a superior predator. He knew that if this went to a full trial, the judge would not only award me the house, but might also severely limit Claire's access to the children. The evidence of neglect and the introduction of a violent partner were more than enough to sway a family court judge in San Francisco. They wanted to settle, and they wanted to do it before the transcript of the deposition could be filed with the court. We spent the next several hours hammering out the details of her surrender. I did not budge on my requirements. I demanded 60% custody of the children and the right to make all major decisions regarding their health and education. I required that any partner she introduced to the children must undergo a court-approved background check and be approved by a guardian ad litem. Most importantly, I insisted on buying out her equity in the Pacific Heights home at a valuation that was favorable to me, given the legal costs she had forced me to incur. Claire had no choice but to sign. Her silver bullet had missed its target, and the recoil had destroyed her entire position. The walk back to our cars was silent. The fog had lifted, and the city was bathed in a cold and brilliant light. Claire stopped me near the elevator and asked me how I could be so cruel. She said she did not recognize the man I had become. I told her that I was the same man I had always been. I was the man who stayed home while she was in the Richmond district. I was the man who picked up our sick daughter when she wouldn't answer the phone. I was the man who protected our children when she left them with a stranger. The person she didn't recognize was herself. She had traded a family and a home for a man with a violent past and a pocket full of lies. The transition happened quickly. Within a month, Claire had moved out of the Pacific Heights house and into a smaller apartment near her firm. She no longer had the financial standing to maintain the lifestyle she had enjoyed, and the social fallout among our friends was immediate. Word of the deposition findings leaked, as these things always do in the tight-knit circles of the Bay Area. People who had once looked at me with suspicion after the protective order was filed now looked at Claire with a mixture of pity and judgment. Bennett Vance disappeared from her life shortly after the legal reality set in. Predators like him rarely stay when the money and the easy access start to dry up. I stand in the living room of my home now, watching my children play in the backyard. The house is quiet, but it is a peaceful silence. The rotation is over, and the stability they need has been restored. I have the 60% custody I fought for, and the house belongs solely to me. I do not feel a sense of joy in her defeat, but I feel a profound sense of justice. I used the very system she tried to weaponize against me to secure the future of my children. The law is a blunt instrument in the hands of a desperate person, but it is a scalpel in the hands of a man who knows how to wait for the truth to emerge. The fog always clears in San Francisco, and when it does, it leaves everything exactly as it truly is.